It's been a year of extraordinary change and upheaval. How do we go forward and create well-being as individuals, with each other, and as a society? Through empathy. Welcome to Roots of Empathy's annual symposium. We celebrate 25 years of making a difference in the lives of over 1 million children. From Canada to New Zealand, Costa Rica to Ireland, our evidence-based programs reduce violence and bullying and promote kindness and inclusion through empathy. Our children are our future, the planet's future. Let's help them build a foundation for well-being towards a caring, peaceful, and civil society. Join our mission.
Oh, love those children. Good afternoon and welcome to Roots of Empathy's 2021 Research Symposium. My name is Mary Ito and I am so pleased to be with you today as your host and more importantly as a board member of Roots of Empathy. I've been with the organization for about 8 years, and since the day I started I have been inspired and committed to the work that they do, even more so as we face the greatest challenge the world has ever seen with the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why our theme this year is empathy and well-being. The idea of well-being has taken on new and greater importance, and so has the role of empathy, which is foundational not only to our well-being as individuals, but also as a society. I'm really excited to guide you through, we think, what is an incredible program we've got lined up over the next 2 days. But just before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we live, work, and play here in Toronto. We are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Roots of Empathy also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Thank you. And we're in great company today. We are so pleased to welcome over 3,937 participants, just shy of 4,000. They are from 52 countries. We just signed on Romania this morning. They all registered for this year's symposium. So thanks to all of you. It's been, I think, one of the unexpected benefits of going virtual during the pandemic. We welcome all of you all over the world. It ranges from Australia to Finland, Ecuador to China, and beyond. And today's record-breaking attendance at our annual symposium, it really feels like something of a sea change in the empathy movement. We hope so, and it is one we are proud to help lead and grow together with you. In just a moment, I'll introduce you to Mary Gordon, the founder, president, and visionary of Roots of Empathy, but just before that, a few housekeeping notes. Many participants have asked about making a donation to Roots of Empathy. As a nonprofit organization, we rely heavily on philanthropic support to pursue our vision of changing the world child by child. If you'd like to donate at any point throughout today's program, please visit rootsofempathy.org and click on the donate button. It is very easy. Please share your experience on social media today by using Roots of Empathy Symposium. That's our hashtag. And right now, I'd like to introduce you to Mary Gordon, the founder and president of Roots of Empathy. She's an award-winning social entrepreneur, educator, author, and child advocate. She founded Roots of Empathy in 1996 after years of leadership in the fields of child development and empathy-based parenting. She's a recipient of the Order of Canada, the Order of Ontario, and the Order of Newfoundland and Labrador. And she's been honored with the Governor General of Canada Award for Innovation. Please join me in welcoming Mary Gordon. Mary, what do you make of the numbers we have registered today?
Amazing, so exciting, Mary, and I just waiting. There are going to be some more coming in. I just heard from Sweden that there's a whole group of people joining us. So thanks so much, Mary, and welcome everyone. We put together a really exciting agenda for this year's symposium, which is taking place during Roots of Empathy's milestone 25th anniversary year. Together with our incredible lineup of guest speakers, we'll be diving deep into topics ranging from empathy and leadership to social justice, brain development, and the role of emotions in learning. Thank you. Here we go, together with this incredible lineup of people who are going to make this an amazing 2 days. But before we kick off today's session with a talk from our wonderful keynote speaker, Dr. Richard Davidson, I want to share a little bit of background on Roots of Empathy and what we are all about. Our mission is simple: to build a more caring, peaceful, and civil society by raising levels of empathy in children and adults. In Canada, we're reaching children in communities from coast to coast to coast, including urban, suburban, rural, Indigenous, and even fly-in communities. Our core program uses a unique approach of building empathy. We introduce school children to a baby. In normal times, our tiny teachers and their parents visit the classroom during the school year, along with the Roots of Empathy instructor, who is also a volunteer. The instructor guides the children to read the baby's emotional cues, to take the baby's perspective, which results in the children finding the vulnerability and humanity in the baby. During COVID-19, we have had to adapt, just like everybody else. In the spring of 2020, recognizing the profound mental health impacts of isolation, fear, and uncertainty in children and in their parents, we created our recovery program, a virtual Roots of Empathy program pivoting from a baby on a blanket in a classroom to a baby on a screen. To support teachers and parents struggling during these challenging times, we also developed a series of 12 short videos that have been translated into 18 languages, 6 of which are Indigenous languages. We also created a separate bilingual video series offering parents and teachers the lens of temperament to understand children's behavior during these uncertain times. Right now, our virtual recovery program is being offered along with our traditional program in countries like New Zealand and Norway, where it is safe to bring babies into classrooms. We have repeatedly heard from children participating in Roots of Empathy sessions throughout the pandemic that they have felt tremendous relief that they can speak about how they're feeling, relief that they're not alone, relief that they have access to supports, the supports they need. None of this would be possible without the support of our incredible champions, our donors and supporters, including all of you. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful keynote speaker. Dr. Davidson is a world-leading neuroscientist and founder of the Center of Healthy Minds, a research center dedicated to the study of positive qualities like kindness and compassion. He has won numerous awards and accolades in his research, including being named one of 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine in 2006. He has published more than 440 articles and is the author of The Emotional Life of the Brain. In 2018, he was appointed to the governing board of UNESCO's Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. After Dr. Davidson's keynote address, he will be taking questions from the viewers at home. So please take a moment during the talk to post your questions located on the live Q&A box next to the media player. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to engage with one of the world's leading experts. Dr. Davidson will be presenting on the topic, how do we solve the crisis of well-being? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Davidson.
Hello, I'm Richard Davidson, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here. I am a neuroscientist by training, and I began my career with a very simple question that still is a burning question for us today. And the question is, why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's challenges, life's slings and arrows, and others more resilient? And in the early part of my career, I focused a lot on the adversity side of the equation, and more recently have devoted my efforts to understanding the positive side. What are the qualities that we can nurture in our minds and in our bodies that may help us to be more resilient and to flourish as human beings. The catalyst for this shift from focusing on the adversity side to focusing on the positive side came in 1992 when I first met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama challenged me on that day in 1992, and he said, why can't you use the same tools of modern neuroscience that you've been using to study anxiety and depression and fear and stress? Why can't you use those same tools to study kindness and to study compassion? And that was a wake-up call for me. And since that time, we've been pivoting much of our work toward the positive side of this equation. And this is where the study of empathy and compassion comes in. And I'll say a lot more about that in just a few minutes. Let me first begin, though, by underscoring the fact that we have an urgent need today in the world to cultivate these positive qualities. Rates of distractibility, of loneliness, of depression, of anxiety are skyrocketing in many, many countries throughout the world. There is a crisis in well-being, a failure to flourish, if you will. And we need to do everything we can to nurture these capacities and to instill in the population this idea that the qualities that underlie well-being, including empathy, are qualities that can be cultivated. They can be trained. They can be developed. They can be learned. It is not the case that we have a fixed amount of empathy or a fixed amount of kindness. Rather, these are skills that can be nurtured through training. So this perspective is a perspective that emerges from a number of important trends in modern science, and I'd like to name just a few of these. The first is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a word that means that our brains are constantly changing. Our brains change in response to experience and in response to training. Our brains are constantly being shaped wittingly or unwittingly. And most of the time, our brains are being shaped unwittingly. Most of the time, we're unaware of the forces around us which are shaping our brain and of which we have very little control. The invitation in this work is that we can actually take more responsibility for our own brains by cultivating healthy habits of mind. So neuroplasticity is extremely important. It gives us a mechanism to understand how certain kinds of training may endure, because this kind of training may change the brain, which then underlies the enduring expression of these characteristics such as empathy and compassion. So a second really important theme in modern science, which is very germane to empathy, is what we call innate basic goodness. Every human being is born into the world with innate basic goodness. And what we mean by this is that we all have a propensity for pro-social behavior, for altruism, for caring. This is something that is part of our biology. The way scientists have discovered this is primarily by studying infants very early in life. And we can see that if infants within the first 6 months of life are given a choice about whether to watch a cooperative, warm-hearted, pro-social encounter versus one that is selfish and aggressive, the infants clearly show a very strong preference for the pro-social. More than 90% of infants prefer to view interactions that are pro-social compared to ones that are anti-social. And this can be discerned very, very early in life before a whole lot of learning has occurred. And so this is what gives us the evidence to suggest that there may be this quality of innate basic goodness. Now, empathy is a characteristic which also is present from birth, at least in its rudimentary forms. We know that infants, neonates, newborn infants, respond to the cry of other infants. There is research which demonstrates that if a baby in a neonatal ICU begins to cry, there is an increased likelihood that other babies in the vicinity will also cry. These are the early roots of empathy, this kind of emotional mimicry, which can be discerned very, very early in life. Now, one of the exciting developments in this area of affective or emotional neuroscience and contemplative neuroscience, neuroscience of practices that come from ancient contemplative traditions that are designed to nourish our mind and our heart, is that we are beginning to understand the key elements of well-being. And what are these key elements of well-being? I'd like to share these with you because they are germane to our understanding of empathy and compassion. We have delineated a framework for understanding well-being that holds that there are four key elements, each of which exhibit plasticity. What we mean by that is each can be trained through certain kinds of practices and nourished, cultivated. So these four key pillars of well-being are the following. The first pillar we call awareness. This is where we would put mindfulness, our capacity to regulate our attention, and our ability to know what our mind is doing. So important. Distractibility is toxic for our well-being. The second pillar of well-being is the pillar that is intimately concerned with both empathy and compassion. And this is the pillar we call connection. Connection is about the qualities which are important for healthy social relationships. These qualities include empathy, appreciation, gratitude, kindness, compassion. All of them are part of this pillar that we call connection. And I'll come back to this pillar and take a deeper dive in just a couple of moments. I want to share with you the other two pillars of well-being. I've talked about awareness. I've talked about connection. The third pillar of well-being we call insight. And insight is about knowing what our minds are actually doing. Now, that may seem strange to some people. Don't we always know what our minds are doing? But how many of you have had the experience of reading a book where you may be reading each word on a page, and you read one page, you may read a second page, and then after a few minutes, you recognize that you have no idea what you've just read. That's an example of our minds being lost. That is an example of a lapse of awareness. And so this quality is so important for our well-being. So with insight, knowing what our minds are doing, there are people who hold beliefs about what is going on in their mind. They may not be aware of these beliefs, but yet these beliefs are shaping how they perceive reality, their understanding of the world. There are people at one extreme who hold very negative beliefs about themselves. They have low self-esteem, for example. And we know that if they take those beliefs to be a true description of who they are, that's a prescription for depression. So applying meta-awareness, knowing what our minds are doing, and having insight into the nature of the thoughts and expectations and beliefs that shape our mind that can be very liberating and can free us from the constraints that are imposed by these beliefs and expectations. So that is insight. And finally, the last pillar of well-being we call purpose. And purpose is about finding our true north, our sense of direction in life, and aligning more and more of our everyday behavior around this sense of purpose. And we know that having a strong sense of purpose is the single most important psychological predictor of longevity in the later years of life. So these qualities make a real difference, not only for our psychological well-being, but also for our physical health. Now let's return to connection and to empathy and compassion, which is at the root of our dialogue today. Scientists have discovered that when a person is empathizing with another person, they take on the feelings of that other person. So let's say that I am empathizing with a person who is in pain. Well, it turns out that if I am a skillful empathizer and show a lot of empathy, then the brain circuits in my brain that are associated with pain also activate. This is how we can feel the emotions of another, which is part of empathy. And so scientists have conducted research that has allowed them to discover this. We know a lot about the circuits in the brain that are important, for example, for physical pain. And we know exactly where to look in the brain to examine these circuits. And so scientists have discovered that when a person is empathizing with another person who is in pain, the empathizer exhibits changes in his or her brain that are similar to the changes in the brain of the person who's really in pain. And so their pain circuits, the empathizer's pain circuits, also begin to activate. They begin to light up. Now, this is very different than the pattern of brain activity that we see in compassion. Compassion, unlike empathy, is the disposition to help relieve the suffering of another. And so this is a pattern which has been, a process which has been studied actively by scientists, particularly over the last 10 years. And there are specific and simple practices from the contemplative traditions of the East that have been studied that are designed to cultivate empathy and compassion. These practices, particularly the practices that are designed to cultivate empathy and compassion, teach us about the different brain mechanisms associated with each. So what we see when a person is practicing cultivating compassion is that brain circuits that are associated with positive emotion are activated, and also brain circuits associated with action are activated. Compassion is very much a preparation to act when suffering is encountered. And so one of the implications of this work is that we can begin to think about how empathy and compassion are connected. In order to empathize with a person who is suffering, we need to feel some of the emotions that that person is feeling. And that is a precursor for compassion. It's difficult for us to express compassion to relieve the suffering of another unless we have some sense of what that suffering is. And so empathy is a process, quality that can help inform us about the suffering of another. And then we can use the signals that we derive from empathy and transform that into compassion to then help relieve that suffering in another. And this is where the neuroscience evidence is so interesting, because we see that the networks in the brain that are associated with action are activated during compassion. And that is because compassion is a state which is preparing a person to act as soon as suffering is encountered. So, this is a really significant insight from the contemplative traditions, and it leads us to develop strategies to help people, particularly people who are in the helping professions, who often talk about compassion burnout. We think it's more appropriate to think of this actually as empathy burnout. And if we can help people to transform empathy into compassion, this will be, we think, very beneficial, because when people are generating compassion, circuits in the brain that are associated with positive emotion are activated. It actually feels good to help another. And in that way, it's very nourishing rather than depleting. So, to step back and take a broader view, I've talked about, and to summarize, I've talked about 4 pillars of well-being, each of which can be cultivated. The first is awareness, the second is connection, the third is insight, and the fourth is purpose. Each of these pillars can be strengthened through simple kinds of practice, and we've discovered that it doesn't take much to get all of this going. And particularly the qualities associated with connection, qualities like empathy and appreciation and compassion, can easily be nurtured because we are pro-social at our roots from the beginning. And so scientific research shows that even a few minutes of practice to nurture these qualities is sufficient to produce a change in objective measures of behavior and of biology. We humans, when we first evolved on this planet, none of us were brushing our teeth. Yet, I'm sure everyone who's watching this brushes their teeth for at least a few minutes a day. This is not part of our genome. This is something we've all learned to do because it's important for our personal physical hygiene. The cultivation of empathy and compassion is important for our personal mental hygiene. And if we spend even as short a time as we spend brushing our teeth, nourishing our mind and our heart in these ways, we have the very strong conviction that the world would be a very different place. Our center has an associated nonprofit that has developed an app that includes all of these 4 pillars of well-being. You can learn more about it by going to the website tryhealthyminds, all one word, .org. And you can download this free app, which is available all over the world. You can learn that we can engage in simple practices for just a few minutes a day to nurture qualities like empathy and compassion. So we would like to invite you to participate, join us in this journey, and nourish your well-being. So thank you so much for your engagement today. And I'd like to now turn it back to Mary for questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Richard. Really appreciate your joining us today. And right now, we're going to open it up to our participants around the world for a short Q&A, about 10 minutes long. We've been getting questions, so I hope you're ready, Richard, for these questions. We have one that's come in, and the person asks, in addition to nurturing and supporting development of these qualities and skills in children, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about supporting educators and parents in reflection and development of these skills.
Yes, thank you so much for asking that important question. It is critical, and to the extent that we can involve educators and parents, that is all the better. In most of the work that we have been doing with children, we have also included educators and occasionally included parents as well. And so, the most comprehensive way to approach the cultivation of well being in our youth is to involve these three groups simultaneously: the youth themselves, the teachers, as well as parents.
All right, thank you for that question. Now, here's another one that's come in from Ireland. Why do you think there is so much distractibility now, creating a crisis of well being? What is it about our times?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that one. I think that the distractibility is certainly in part a product of the digital world in which we are living today. If you actually compare the performance of children on standardized measures of attention, and I'm here not referring to self report measures, but more objective measures, and you compare kids 50 years ago who took these same measures, it turns out that kids today are performing worse than kids performed 50 years ago. And presumably, a important contributor is that kids today are living in a digital world that simply did not exist 50 years ago. And so, these um, products are certainly not going to go away. And so part of our education needs to be, I think, teaching kids how to more responsibly use these products, how to alter or shift their relationship to these products in ways that enable them to be helpful rather than harmful, which I do believe is possible.
All right, thank you for that. And another question, I'm not sure where this is from, but how do you gain insight? And I think by insight, they mean that sense of presence of mind, awareness, if you don't have time.
Thank you for that too. The issue of not having time is a complicated one, and certainly I appreciate that. And I think many of us during the pandemic have felt this warping of time more acutely than ever. Uh, One of the ways that we address this is by harnessing all the activities of daily living during which we can actually also be nurturing our mind. Think about commuting, think about walking, about doing physical exercise, cleaning your house, washing your dishes, all of the non cognitively demanding activities of daily living can be accompanied by mental practices that can actually nurture these qualities of well being. We actually just finished a large randomized controlled trial with our Healthy Minds program intervention, which is available freely in our app that I mentioned, with about 650 public school teachers who also reported to us that they have no time. And we, as part of this program, give people the choice, and they can do these practices while they're doing other activities of daily living of the sort that I described. And about 40% of the time, teachers elected to engage in these active practices, and we found tremendous benefit. So these kinds of practices don't require that you necessarily be sitting alone in a quiet space. You can be out and about in the world and at the same time nourishing your mind. You can even do this while you're brushing your teeth.
Is that something you do, Richard? Because I don't like cleaning the house, so this would be a good way to make it useful time for me.
Absolutely. And as I alluded to in my talk, we all have figured out how to make time to brush our teeth every day. And I think most people, particularly those who are joining this webinar, would agree that their minds are even more important than their teeth. And yet, many of us don't even take that small amount of time every day to nourish our minds.
Yeah, No, good point. This is an interesting question from Milwaukee. You speak of innate basic goodness. As a neuroscientist, do you believe that a person can inherit a propensity for innate antisocial behavior?
The short answer to that is yes, but there's no question that there are heritable characteristics that set our sort of baseline characteristics. And unfortunately, there are some individuals that come into the world with less of a capacity for empathy than others, and maybe even some tendencies toward antisocial behavior. There are heritable contributions to many behavioral traits, but the fact that there are heritable contributions says absolutely nothing about the extent to which they are malleable, the extent to which we can actually train them and shape them. We know that there are certain disorders, for example, that have strong, very strong genetic contributions. For example, the metabolic disorder phenylketonuria, PKU. And we know that that disorder can be completely reversed through a change in diet. So the fact that there are genetic contributions doesn't really mean very much in terms of how we can train these characteristics. So for someone who inherits perhaps more antisocial characteristics, it's going to be important, particularly early in life, to nourish the kinds of qualities that enable them to cultivate empathy and to cultivate kindness.
All right. This one is from Canada. You mentioned that helping people makes one feel better. Is there actually neuroscience to back that up?
To back that up, meaning that we can help people feel better?
No, I think what they mean is there actually evidence to back the fact that people feel better? What is the neuroscience behind them actually feeling better? Did it show up on
I
a
see.
scan? Did it, was there some
Yes.
biological marker that was used or?
Yes, it shows up on scans, it shows up in other metrics of biology, and it is reflected in their behavior. So, just to give you a very simple, concrete response, we've done experiments. This particular study that I'm about to describe is a study that we published a few years ago. It's a randomized controlled trial involving 2 weeks of training, just 2 weeks, where participants were invited to practice for up to 30 minutes a day, simple compassion practice to cultivate compassion and its associated qualities. And we put them in the scanner before and after this 2 weeks of training. We also measured different behavioral features, and it turns out that people can change even in this such a brief amount of practice. This is 2 weeks, a maximum of 30 minutes a day. That's a total of 7 hours of total training. And we can see objective changes in their brain that we can measure with MRI and changes in their pro-social behavior.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. You said that babies, newborns, begin to cry when other babies start to cry. How do you know that's empathy?
Well, it's the antecedents of empathy. And so, one way that empathy is studied and defined neuroscientifically is the extent to which a person is able to feel the emotions of another person, to have an emotional resonance with another person. And research shows in adults, for example, that if you're empathizing with a person who is in pain, the empathizer shows activation in brain networks that we know are associated with pain. And so the evidence in newborn infants showing that they have a greater propensity to cry if another baby near them is crying we believe, and other scientists believe, represent a kind of automatic response that is the foundation upon which the further development of empathy is based.
Really? You know, because I sort of wondered about that myself, and I thought, well, if I was just born and went through that kind of experience, I think I'd probably want some peace and quiet. I'd be pretty annoyed if I just had all this screaming around me. It would make me cry too. I guess that's not possible, is it, Richard?
Well, I think that would be assigning very sophisticated thinking skills to a newborn infant, which I don't think the evidence would support.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciated your answers and your talk. It was very enlightening.
Thank you so much. It was a delight. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. That's Dr. Richard Davidson, and he is with the Center for Healthy Minds. I have to say, I mean, given the fact that he talked about the crisis of well-being that we're in, I found his talk very hopeful. And again, you can go to his website, the Center for Healthy Minds, if you'd like to know more. Right now, I'd like to introduce our next segment, a conversation between our special guests, Jimmy Briggs and Jesse Lipscomb. They are exploring Black fatherhood across borders. This is something I know that many of you have been interested in. Jimmy Briggs is a documentary storyteller, a writer, and an activist. He's with the Skoll Foundation, leads the organization's racial justice team. He's also a member of the New York City Mayor's Gender Equity Commission and an adjunct professor in social change journalism at the International Center of Photography in New York. He was also co-founder and executive director emeritus of the Man Up campaign, an organization with a global mission to activate youth to stop violence against women and girls. Jesse Lipscomb is an actor, former athlete, activist, and entrepreneur. Hailing from Alberta, Jesse began his acting career at the age of 14 in the film Children of Dust alongside the legendary Sidney Poitier. In addition to acting, he's also a producer of award-winning films and television series, including It's Not My Fault and Tiny Plastic Men. In 2016, Jesse launched the Make It Awkward campaign to combat racism, misogyny, homophobia, and hatred. He now works with organizations and business leaders to help them understand and address racism. Jimmy and Jesse, hello to you both. We are so looking forward to your conversation.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for having us. I'm Jesse Lipscomb, father of 3 sons.
I'm Jimmy Briggs, father of 2 daughters. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Jesse and I are going to be talking about being fathers, parenting children of color, in this moment especially, promise and peril. Jesse, I'm curious, from your perspective, having 3 sons, the conversations that you're having around safety, around protection, and with your young men.
It's actually interesting times, as we all know, and I imagine our stories are going to be a little different with me raising 3 young men and you raising 2 young women. But the conversations, they started, just for some background, I have a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And so some of these conversations started a while ago, and they seem to continually happen over and over. And one thing that's stuck with me lately is I've unfortunately found myself having dreams, like really bad dreams about all of these, well, we'll call it the war on blackness. I'm waking up in the middle of the night and thinking about my own children, but then also realizing I have to be my best self if I'm trying to raise them. So I can't bring my own stress and drama of what's happening into the parenting. And it's tough back and forth. What about you, Jimmy? What have you found that's been important, or I guess alarming maybe?
No, I take what you said to heart, Jesse, sincerely. I mean, I haven't been having dreams, but as a writer, I've had the impulse to write everything down. I feel like every day something's happening that spurs me to want to do an essay or some sort of editorial story. It's challenging, because I do have a daughter. My older daughter is actually almost 20 years old. She's a freshman in college. My younger daughter is 11 months old, and so it's interesting for me just to see the generational gap between them, and wondering, how do I process this world that seems to be at war with me as a Black man, but as you said, a war against Blackness itself? How do I process this threatening world in a way that is not discouraging, thwarting their hopes and dreams?
Yeah, you're right. Because at the same time, I'm trying to keep the beauty and wonder and strength of Blackness center stage, while also not trying to pretend like there aren't real threats and real inequalities that exist based just on their skin color alone. Like my job, I'm an actor and an activist, so they see their father do this work day in and day out, which I hope is a good thing. But I also hope it doesn't like sway the needle to this world of living in fear, because that's not a thing that I'll do. I'll live in the reality of it and I feel the weight of it. But at the same time, you know, living in the moments and just showing what a joyful life can still be is very, very important for me to keep in their minds.
Absolutely. I mean, dealing with generation gap, but with both my kids, Jesse, like you with your sons, I'm always uplifting the joy, always uplifting the cohesiveness, the strength of our family. That even though the world at times be threatening, making sure that I almost curate the world for them, you know, to elevate the joy, elevate the wonder, both in the natural world, both in the arts. Like you, I'm not an artist in the same way, but I'm a writer, storyteller, and really leaning into, let's say, my gifts, and creativity to kind of wrap them in the possibilities. You know, the world will bring what's going to bring, but as much as possible, I want them to be equipped for that world and to have the strength to be resilient and to whatever challenge they come in that direction.
You know, as I'm listening to you speak right now, and like those who don't know me may not know this, but I mean, I lead with love, I lead with empathy and all of the work that I'm doing. But right now I'm sitting here watching this conversation that you and I are having and just thinking how actually unfair it is, right? The fact that we have to have this conversation where we're talking about two Black fathers trying their absolute hardest to raise their children so that they can be safe, so they can just exist in life and live their absolute best life. And we need to have conversations about it so that we can help teach other fathers and have conversations with others' fathers. It really says a lot about the environment, the state that we're in right now, that I'm happy this is normalized, Jimmy, because I love chatting with you, right? Yeah. But I hate that it has to be normalized. Like that thing is really just, it weighs heavy on my soul for sure.
Well, it's interesting, Jesse, as you're talking, I got to be honest with you, I'm looking behind you, the orchid created behind you. I'm seeing Malcolm X, I'm seeing Martin Luther King Jr., I'm seeing James Baldwin, all of whom were key figures of inspiration and strength throughout my life. And I think you're right, it's kind of surreal that these conversations, such as this one, have to be normalized. They have to become, part of the journey our children take. Going from youth and adolescence until adulthood. At the same time, I think there's so many heroes and sheroes in our, collective and shared histories, nationally, globally, locally, who really, I think for me, I know for you too, really represent beacons of light. That the journey may be hard, the path may be, have obstacle challenge, some of which we can't foresee, some of which we can. But still that it's possible to navigate this journey in such a way that one's excellence, one's dreams and hopes do not be dashed, that there is a way forward to live life fully and to live life, most importantly, with dignity, even when the threats to one's dignity or humanity maybe exist somewhere in the world.
Yeah, it's about relating with people. It's about the commonality. So as we talk about the struggles, ideally there's somebody watching and saying, you know what, I want the same for my children. I want my children to be in the best place they possibly can. I actually never really thought about what a world might look like if that was threatened on a daily basis. And I think the other side of this, the good part about this, is having these conversations and really just humanizing humans. And it's a weird thing to say, but like humanizing Black people. As it turns out, we are humans that love and care and share and want the best for ourselves and the best for our children. And the more we can have those conversations, those intercultural communications, I think the closer we get to making some of the real changes. Because you take one person one at a time and have a conversation with them, we're on the same page for the most part, right? But then when we look at this whole thing collectively is where the problem is. And that's that question. How do we move that needle in the right direction so that you and I can just be parents, right? Just parents, not Black parents raising like Black children. No, just parents raising their kids. That would just be a wonderful thing.
Jesse, I'm so with you, man. I think we both, all of us want that. I think it's about common ground, as you're saying about empathy. It's common ground, finding those places where we do share interests, share hopes, aspirations. We share joy and happiness, the things that bring us light, that bring us smiles. As a parent, but also as an individual in this world, I've always tried to strive for, beyond skin, beyond gender, beyond sexual identity, beyond faith, whatever intersections of identity that one could take as separateness or otherness, really leaning into what connects us as a way of exploring what makes us different. I mean, as well as I, this here, this is a small fraction of who we are biologically, but yet it shapes so much of how we are seen in the world and how we're forced to show up in the world. And I think, it is possible, Jesse, to your point, first live our lives in a way that, this is not, it's not a barrier. It's not, it's not a blessing or barrier. It's just who we are. It's the skin is what we wear in the world, but it doesn't define how we move and how we impact the world.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's not a blessing or a barrier as a fact, but it fully is a barrier right now. And right, like I hear the words are true. They're true words. It's not, but yet it is. It's looked on as one very often. One of the things you were saying, we're talking about our skin color. This is something I did with my kids. We went to Home Depot. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, so I don't know if you guys have Home Depot there. But anyways, at Home Depot, we went to the Benjamin Moore paint section and got the color swabs. So we went, and so I know I'm a Black man, but I like to talk about how we're not a monolith. Like how what I say is not for all Black people, and what Jimmy says is not for all Black people. As it turns out, even my kids were all different shades. So I went to the Benjamin Moore color section, and in the summer, I'm ancient walnut, and in the winter, I am toasted bagel. And all of us have different paint swabs. But the beautiful part about that was there's still all this beauty in the individuality of all of us, that we can all take our own paths to a very similar future. And just because the world, quote unquote, may see us as one thing, don't get caught up in that one thing. You are so many things. Yeah. For me, that was a really beautiful and fun thing that we did together, that it took that idea of like Blackness and turned it into something like I'm Jesse and this is me. And yes, I live in this world, but ultimately I get to pick. Even if there are barriers, like you mentioned, I get to choose how much those are going to weigh me down and how much I'm going to focus on them. I'm also going to choose on the beauty of today and living in this moment right now, because that's something we can take care of and we have power and control of.
That's right. It's so, I love the Home Depot story, Jesse. We have Home Depot here in New York, so I can relate to what you're saying.
Awesome, that's good.
Yeah, it's amazing because even amongst, I don't know you and your sons, even amongst my daughters and I, all of us are different shades. My daughter, is a cafe au lait. I'm so I think you said burnt almond. The baby is a darker complexion. We're all connected. We're all family, kin, and I think just when my daughters and I kind of put our hands next to each other and see the differences. Even between us, we're appreciating the differences in tone, but also honoring and celebrating each other. Because we're all connected. And I think, to your point, I think even beyond one's individual family. You and I, as fathers and adults, know this. It's easily possible to create meaningful connections, to create, as I would say, durable bonds with across this skin color. And I, from my experience in my life, I've done that more times than I can count. And I think, for our kids, modeling that we can have deep, connecting, loving relationships, empathetic relationships, irrespective of one's skin color.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said before, change moves at the speed of empathy. And it's this idea that, like, just because someone doesn't speak like you, look like you, walk like you, eat the same foods you eat, once you can see yourself in them, that's when you can feel for them, feel with them,
yes.
protect them. And And right now I'm preaching to the choir, and I know this because as a marginalized individual, and don't get me wrong, I have a ton of privileges and I understand that. I try to even use those to support those who don't. But knowing that, it's my job to reach out, to learn, to discover the similarities so that we can get closer to this understanding that we're not different. And it depends on whatever your beliefs might be a universal consciousness, could be God, could be this, but the idea that we're just the same thing. And if we know that, I don't want to hurt myself, which means that's you, Jimmy, that's you who's watching, that's my kids, that's your kids. And imagine loving them that way. Nothing goes wrong. Nothing goes wrong in that world. And there's nothing to be scared of. And that's the thing too, right? Fear is so at the heart of this. I don't know, so I'm scared. I make decisions based out of fear instead of looking further to investigate, learn, empathize, grow together. And I think if we could just get rid of that little horror story, that scary book, and understand that, Jimmy, I just met it not too long ago, right? I knew you were wonderful within 2 seconds. It just makes sense.
Yeah. I've been the same, Jesse. We've spoken before by phone, but this is the first time we have a conversation that's just this way. But something you said, though, I want to just go back to, if we have time, you struck me about your dreams. I'm just curious if you're going to share, those fears, that stress that I don't understand. You don't want to show your sons. Where do you put it? Where does it go? I mean, as you and I both know, as adult men, those tensions have to go somewhere. I'm just curious, in your case, how do you release it, or where do you put it?
Yeah, you're right. I have to say the dreams are new. This isn't something. So I've been an activist and working and speaking for years, and whether it's me having a thick skin, quote unquote, or not, but I have been able to do a lot of it. And then every once in a while, there's an emotional dump. And for me, that's writing as well. That's music. That's art. But lately, the dreams, which have been very graphic, and they have just been visions of pure police brutality and shootings of unarmed Black men. And it's just, I'm just about to do something and I can't do anything. So it's just this idea that as much as I'm doing, I can't do it by myself. And then the idea of waking up with this, I don't want to put that on my children. But my outlets are things like this, Jimmy. And I'm a Black man, and there's a big stigma. Ancient walnut, toasted bagel, Black by definition. But there's a stigma that, men aren't supposed to feel, aren't supposed to cry. I throw that in the trash. Jimmy, I would cry. I cry every Sunday, Monday, American Idol. That is the show where all of the tears come, because I see people's hopes and dreams, and I stick with my sons, and I'm snotting on them and crying. I love crying so much. So I have no problem getting my emotions out. And I get to share them with audiences, and whether it's Facebook Lives or in-person things before COVID. So I do feel okay that I do have an ability to get it out. It comes in and I know it's not mine. I feel it, I cry about it. I get angry-ish, not super mad. I just usually want to do more. So for me, if an emotion shows up, it's an emotion, it's real, it's valid, it's important, and I express it as much as I can. And I want my sons to do the same. Their dad's a crybaby. That's fine. That means be strong, because it's harder. It is harder to cry publicly. We try to say we're tough men. Well, then have a tear in front of your tough dudes. That's hard work.
Absolutely, Jesse. I appreciate you, man. I really do, brother. It's so funny. Growing up, I was a crybaby growing up. I'll be honest with you, Jesse. I was a crybaby growing up, but the men of my life, the adult men of my life as a child, maybe it was the case in your situation too. They really kind of, it's also kind of ground out of you, especially as a Black boy, you're told don't cry, man up, be strong, don't be soft, be hard. And I think, when I realized, Jesse, I took that to heart. I mean, I cried a lot. I was very emotional growing up. As an adult, maybe because of the job I had as a journalist, when I was working as a journalist, it kind of drowned out that emotionality out of myself. I mean, I would put emotion into my writing. And in relationships, I was emotional, of course, but to the world, it was almost like had to be stoic, had to be like a sphinx, not showing anger or rage, not showing tears, not showing laughter, just showing a blankness. Now I'm realizing that with my first daughter, I think I was still that way. With my younger daughter, realizing I have to be my full self. I have to show my full humanity so that she sees what a fully realized man looks like, a fully realized human being looks like. We're emotional creatures. We need that emotion. I think more than anything, it's something you said before, striking as well about fear. I find myself loving my partner, loving my children fiercely. Not necessarily fearlessly. I mean, I'm carrying fear myself for them, but my love with and towards them, I'm fierce in my love. Man, I mean, unabashed about loving them publicly, kissing, hugging them, falling over them, and at the same time, loving them in a way that saying that you have to be. I want to be strong, independent women, strong, independent women of color, which in some ways, then the world's going to be even more challenging for you because of your gender. But no matter what, you can still be strong. You can still be resilient and be emotional and be complex and not be broken.
I love what you were saying, and I think this idea, the idea of men and the parameters that we've been given to be strong, to be hard. But when you really look at it, being strong, it takes a very strong man to be able to tell his friend, his homie, his dad, his brother that I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm scared. And there's this misnomer that like being hard and being strong means you don't say those things. Being open and being vulnerable has these negative connotations. And me as a father of 3 men, I like to switch that word vulnerable to available. It's the same thing, but available means if I'm sad, I'm available for you to help. I'm available for opportunities that come as a result of it. I'm there, I'm in the moment, and I'm not, even when you were mentioning yourself that, growing up and you weren't able to, it was taken out of you. I hear that and it hurts my heart. It's like you weren't allowed to be a full person. And I see that so many times. And I think a lot of that it just does such a disservice. And this idea of hard, strong, angry Black men, Black women, all of this is just bringing us right to the problems that we're trying to fight. This conversation, I know, could go on and on. Jimmy, I have to say, though, but thank you so much for having this convo with me. We're going to have more of these, I hope, in the future. And I'll get some tips, man. I don't think I'm having any more kids. I should probably do that officially. But if I do and I have a daughter, we can kind of like swap some stories.
Please.
Yeah. Guys, listen, join us, ladies, gentlemen, people, everybody, join us in the cafe. At the end of the day, we're going to continue some more chats, and it's been a wonderful start of my day. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
We certainly did, Jimmy and Jesse, and thank you so much for your honesty and opening up your lives to us. And as you heard Jesse say, they are going to rejoin us at about 2:30 with moderator Keita Deming. We have had huge interest in this topic of Black parenting. We have been hearing from you from all over the world. You've been sending in comments and questions. I'm sorry that Jesse and Jimmy were not able to stay right now for a Q&A, but as I said, join us later again, or stay with us, I should say, till 2:30 when we have a cafe with them. They will be back. Right now, we would like to introduce you to the Roots of Empathy instructors. Here's one of them, and these instructors are certainly the backbone of our programs. She's talking about what this program has meant to her.
Aloha, my name is Angelica Friedman, and I've been an instructor in Hawaii for 5 years. I'd like to share a story about a community and a classroom that was very near and dear to my heart. My first year as an instructor, I had the opportunity to deliver the program on West Oahu in Nanakuli and Waianae. And these are communities that have some of our highest poverty and highest homeless rates. One of the reasons that I was so committed to delivering the program out there, even though it was an hour and a half each way from my home, is because it is a community that I was a part of, where I lived with my mom in a homeless tent community as an elementary school child. And so to have the opportunity to reconnect with that community and to share the Roots of Empathy program really meant a lot to me. And I wanted to share a story about a time in the classroom where there was a little girl who I noticed early on had a lot to share when we would have our Roots of Empathy discussions. And I noticed quite quickly that a lot of the students responded to her quite negatively, sometimes putting her down, rolling their eyes, mocking her. But she kept going. She always had something to share. And there was one particular day where she shared a story about her life, and she shared that she had lost both of her parents, and she had been in a number of foster care homes. And she shared about how now she was hanging on to this one woman that was taking care of her and making sure that she had the things that she needed and that she felt safe and loved. And she shared that she was afraid of losing this person. And I got to witness the students around the room empathizing with her. And after the class, a few of them went over and rubbed her back or even hugged her. And the wonderful thing was recognizing that in our classes that followed, that never happened again, in the sense that the students never mocked her or teased her or rolled their eyes at her. And what was amazing is that through the Roots of Empathy program and that risk-free, safe environment that we create for the children, they have the opportunity to share their experiences. There's so much power in asking, how did that make you feel? And the effect on this little girl was for her to begin to feel included, for her to begin to feel a sense of belonging with her classmates. For the classroom teacher, she shared about how the Roots of Empathy program completely changed the way that she interacted and communicated with her students. She no longer assumed that she knew everything about each of them. Experiences in the Roots of Empathy classrooms, like what I just shared, and over my 5 years as a Roots of Empathy instructor, have impacted and changed my life tremendously. It's made me a better parent and a better person. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to share this with students and educators.
Thank you, Angelica. That was a really touching story about that little girl. And Angelica has been an instructor with us for 5 years. We're going to hear more from instructors throughout the next 2 days. Right now, our next speaker comes to us from Los Angeles, which I don't know if you've been following about the progress they've been making with their COVID situation, but they've been doing remarkably well. Dr. Dan Siegel is a professor of psychiatry. He's with the UCLA School of Medicine. He's the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He's also the executive director of the MindSight Institute. It focuses on the development of mindsight and teaches insight, empathy, and integration for individuals, families, and communities. Dr. Siegel is going to be speaking about dissolving borders through empathy. Hello, Dan. Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Mary. It's an honor to be here with you, and welcome to everyone. It's really quite exciting to be exploring the roots of empathy by diving deeply into what empathy actually is from a scientific point of view. And we'll be taking a framework of science where we combine all the different disciplines of science, everything from math and physics to sociology and anthropology, and put them together into one framework. And that framework has a name called interpersonal neurobiology. And from this framework, when we ask questions like, what is empathy? Or what is the self that is having empathy? We try to take a broad perspective that hopefully will be useful to you in the important work you're doing to try to make a more empathic world. So let's begin with just some simple definitions. The term empathy for some scientists is equated with emotional resonance. And when they take this kind of perspective, what's sometimes said is that there is a downside to empathy, that you can resonate too much with someone's emotions and get burnt out. So a number of articles and even books will say, oh my gosh, empathy is not such a good thing. What's really good is compassion. And I feel that these perspectives are quite limited in the sense that when people hear them, they actually begin to think, oh, empathy is not something we should encourage because someone wrote that there's a downside to it. There's a dark side to it, that it's somehow not good to be empathic. What they're really referring to is a broader question about what is empathy really, and how can we see that it is of benefit to our sense of well-being, internally for our individual lives, relationally for our interpersonal connections, and even for our connections within nature. And we'll be identifying those three facets of our connectedness, if you will, connections inside of our bodies, connections to other human beings, and connections within all of nature as fundamental aspects of empathy. So let's look at what a broader view of empathy is. We can begin with that notion that empathy includes emotional resonance, feeling another person's feelings. That's one of at least 5 aspects of empathy. A second aspect of empathy is to actually have what's called perspective taking. So if I were being empathic with Mary, it would be, I would say, if I was looking through her glasses, as I was looking from her point of view, how would things seem to me? What would her perspective be? So that's perspective taking on top of our first facet of empathy, which is feeling another person's feelings or emotional resonance. A third facet of empathy that's studied is the idea that I can understand Mary's experience. I can think, well, I know this about her background, this about her childhood, this about where she's at now in her life. And given all these things that I understand about Mary's subjective experience, what would my cognitive understanding, a kind of cognitive empathy, be, where I'd logically think through with emotional insight, so it would build on emotional intelligence, how she might be conducting her life and what things might have meaning for her. So I need to use social intelligence as well to understand cognitively what empathically I can understand about Mary's experience. A fourth facet of empathy is that when someone else does well, if Mary succeeds at something and is joyful, I can actually have empathic joy. I can feel excited about her successes. And this is one of the important facets of empathy that's often missing in our competitive cultures that we live in. Empathic joy, this can be called, or sympathetic joy, is so important because imagine a world where instead of feeling threatened by others' happiness, we actually feel enlivened by it, that we're empowered to then have people do well in the world. And it's possible to develop empathic joy. We just need to actually focus on that in a sometimes highly, comparative world that we live in, especially on social media. A fifth facet that we'll talk about empathy is called empathic concern. And this is basically where we sense someone else is not doing so well. For example, they may be feeling sad or really upset for various reasons, angry, fearful. In some way, they're suffering. They're not feeling in a positive way. And we're concerned about that suffering. And then we want to use that empathic concern, this fifth facet of empathy, to open up a different set of networks in our own brain, if you will, that are the networks of compassion. And compassion, which for about 98% of us requires empathic concern to be a window that opens it up, we then feel the other person's suffering. So that's a form of empathy, to feel another person's feelings. And then we think about what might we do to help reduce that person's suffering? And then we take action to reduce that suffering. So you can see that in terms of one individual inside of their skin encased body, to be empathic with another has at least 5 facets of what that word means. And in Roots of Empathy, I think all 5 are cultivated in a beautiful, beautiful way. And so when I've had the opportunity to go with Mary Gordon to the schools, various schools where Roots of Empathy is taught, I've been very impressed with how, in fact, these 5 facets of empathy are a part of what the kids are learning, whatever their grade is, when they're watching the infant in that program. Now, what I'd like to do is talk to you about what's the connection about developing empathy and developing well-being. And we're going to look at a number of scientific findings. One is just that the relationships we have with our own bodily experience, so an inner relationship, with other people, so connections interpersonally, and then with nature, connections with the living world. Each of these three aspects of connection, if you will, can be identified as a kind of spatial way of referring to energy flow. For the inner, it's energy flow happening inside this body I was born into. But what we need to realize is that energy flow is not limited by the skull nor the skin. In fact, it can be shared between one human being and another human being, or like in Roots of Empathy, in a group of human beings. So we can call that the interpersonal, inter meaning between, the personal meaning the within. So interpersonal is how we actually bring our whole bodily self to then share energy, and some of that energy is in a symbolic form called information. So we're sharing energy and information in what is called a relationship. Now, studies show that not only is our relationship with other people so important for our well-being, but our relationship within nature is important. And many children are getting, this nature insufficiency, this inadequate amount of time they're out in the natural world. And yet the studies are very clear that our ability to focus attention, to reduce anxiety, to reduce depression, and to feel a sense of thriving are enhanced by all these relationships, by relationships in nature is what I was thinking about there, but you could apply those same things to our relationships with other people. So what I'd like to do in the last few minutes of our time together today is just ask you to consider that the word that is not being said here is the word self, S-E-L-F. And I want you to consider that in modern culture, we often think of self as something defined by the body. So if you were to say to me, where is the self of Dan? You might point to my body. I might do the same thing. If I said to you, where's your self? You might point to your body. If we said, where's the mind that's creating yourself? Some people might point to their head. Some people might point to their heart. Wherever you would point, it's generally inside the body for modern culture. Some people call it Western culture, but I did that once with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he made sure to say to me, don't call it Western. It's all around the world now. So now I use the word modern culture because it's East and West. So in modern times, we have this individualistic view, is what an anthropologist would call it. The most individualistic place in the world is the United States of America, where this body lives. And sadly, what we can show is that when you view the self as only individual, you get an excessive activation of a certain network in the brain in your head called the default mode network, which when it's overly differentiated, can give you a feeling of anxiety, depression, disconnection. And in that view of a totally separate self, what I want to have you consider is that it comes from this sequence of categories and concepts, even beneath our awareness, that say that the self is in your body. So you may say, well, Dan, what are you talking about? Of course the self is in my body. But if the self is a center of experience, let's just call it that, then what I would like you to consider is that all of the relationships we just talked about, being tuned in a sense, to your own inner life of your body, would be almost like inner empathy, being tuned in to the sensations, the perspective, and even the agency. So there's an acronym for you, SPA, the sensations or subjectivity, the perspective or point of view, the agency or the actions. This SPA is a helpful acronym for saying, what is the self? Well, sure, you have an inner SPA, right? This inner subjectivity, perspective, and agency. But our relationships with other people are also a self. There's an inner self, sure, inside the body. There's also an inter self. And this relational aspect of self has a sensation to it, a perspective to it, an agency to it that you can feel with these 5 facets of empathy. And then you go, well, wow, so that inner self is both with people, yes, and within nature, yes. So then you take a big step back, and I'll ask you just to do a simple, fun exercise. If you're capable of lifting up your hand and looking at your thumb, take a look at your thumb, right? And focus your eyesight if you have the capacity to do this, or if you're challenged in vision, just use hearing and try to shift a kind of identity lens. If you have vision, let's do it that way. Look at your thumb, right? You can see your thumb. It's a part of this body you were born into. But now let your eyesight go beyond the thumb to whatever's past it, and look at the specific thing beyond your thumb, and notice how it's no longer a part of your body, but it's a part of the world in which you live. And now, as you're looking past your thumb, let that very focused and, in a sense, narrow lens become wide angled, and still look beyond your thumb and take in the whole panorama of what is in front of you. And notice now you're taking in the whole picture. This is also the world that has a sensation to it, perspective to it, and you can act on behalf of it, like supporting a reduction in racism and social injustice, like supporting environmental protection. And all these ways of seeing people who may not look like you in terms of our different, quote, race, which is actually a mental construction, can allow us to see we can differentiate people and even species to realize we are all a part of one whole. The way I try to remember this ability to move an identity lens from near to far, to make it wide angle, is to realize we have, yes, a close me, but we also have a relational we. And to integrate those two, what I'll leave you with is that what we can do is have a me plus we equals the integrated self, the integrated identity and broader belonging of we, MWE. And that is how we let empathy blossom in our lives together. And together, we can make this a more empathic, a kinder, a more compassionate world for all of us, for human beings and for all of nature. Thank you so much for sharing this journey with me. And now I'll send it back to you, Mary.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was absolutely fascinating. I find it interesting that you are the second person to mention the Dalai Lama today in a talk, because Richard Davidson mentioned him earlier. And I know Mary Gordon, in fact, has met the Dalai Lama at least once or twice. I feel like the odd person out here. I'm just not tight with the Dalai Lama myself.
Well, he is a very fun-loving person, full of joy, and a beautiful book that he wrote with a colleague of mine, and Desmond Tutu, is called The Book of Joy. And if you haven't read that, it's by Doug Abrams and Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. It's a beautiful and fun romp through the importance of compassion and joy in our lives.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Jen. Great to talk to you.
Thank you, Mary. Pleasure. Thanks to all of you.
And more information about Dan Siegel and all our other speakers is available on our website, rootsofempathy.org. You can check that out once the symposium is over tomorrow. We are hearing from people all over the world. Thank you so much for your comments, your questions. And I find what's interesting is that there's a community that is developing among you, conversations going on, one country to another, participants talking to each other. So it's all very organic. It's wonderful. We are getting questions as well about Roots of Empathy. So if you have any questions, and we do invite you to send in your questions to the chat room, to Mary Gordon, our founder. And we will try to get to those questions on tomorrow's symposium. So again, please send them in, but make sure you address it Mary Gordon so that we know those are for her. Thank you. All right, well, when we were putting this symposium together, there were a lot of questions regarding empathy that we wanted to answer. So we thought, well, why don't we pose one question, one empathy question, to a researcher each day, and then we give them the opportunity to answer it. We invited Dr. Michael Unger, who is a family therapist and professor of social work at Dalhousie University, where he also holds the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family, and Community Resilience. He's also the director of the Resilience Research Center. He leads the design of research and evaluation projects, focusing on the resilience of marginalized children, families, and adult populations who are experiencing mental health challenges. An underlying theme of this symposium is the relationship between empathy and social justice. So Michael Unger, your question is, how does our experience of social justice impact our empathy towards others?
Thanks, Mary. Wow, there's a big question. When I study resilience and as a clinician as well, I mean, I'm very focused on this idea of that, the people around us and how we're treated in our communities, that we're not just isolated. So there is definitely a link in the work that I do between people's experiences of social justice, that they feel that their communities are responding to them, meeting their needs, or as I will talk about, that their resilience is negotiated with those around them. So if we begin to think about the reciprocity between ourselves and our communities, and that community is definitely responding to our needs, then I'm gonna sort of stretch this. And I'm saying that I think most of us experience that empathy shown to us is then a grounding for us to then go forward and actually help others. Now, look, let's face it, there are those icons of inspiration like the Nelson Mandelas in the world who can, basically be oppressed and horribly badly treated by their societies and still find it within themselves to show empathy towards their jailers. But most of us don't reach that place. Most of us seem to need the communities around us to, in a sense, have a social contract with us. And that sense that, I'm going to contribute or I'm going to give back if I'm treated fairly as well. And fair treatment is a part of our resilience. It's, I can be positive in my mind for sure. I can take a moment to think and to be more optimistic about my future. I can perceive that as people do. But ultimately, it's still about whether or not somebody is responding to you and helping you to get through a crisis in a way that, well, frankly, makes sense to you. I mean, I experienced that in my late teens when I was going through quite a difficult time with my family. I emancipated when I was 16 years old. The year before, I had a teacher at school, in a sense that really saw in me some promise, I guess, or something, reached out, helped to at a particularly crucial moment in my life, made sure that I didn't sort of run away from home. Really was there as an emotional support. Someone who just kind of stepped up and said, you're worth more. You're definitely, you have something to contribute here. You're valuable. And I think that always left me this kind of sense of, wow, if the world could treat me like that, if I could somehow, draw that to me, then maybe my role was to sort of reciprocate that or push that back out into the world. And maybe, to tell you the truth, maybe that's why I chose to live where I live. I live in the Maritimes, near Halifax. And I think what drew me here was that the Maritimers, like frankly many other parts of our country, are casserole people. There's that you know what I mean? Like someone down the street breaks their hip, or during a pandemic, they need a little extra support. And suddenly the neighbors all bring casseroles down the street. There's a sense of community collective. In fact, I had a neighbor, return a casserole dish that wasn't mine. You have to sort of argue on your doorstep. No, that's not mine. But there's that sense of reciprocity again. And the sense that if my community treats me fairly, and I think there is space here, despite the jokes about, in the Maritimes, we joke about, people who are from away and all this kind of stuff. But as we really know, beneath that, there's also a sense of, I want to connect with you. I want a sense of cohesion. And when people are willing to sort of participate in that back and forth, something magical happens. people get empathy shown towards them. And there's a cycling of that, that's cycling back, which of course brings us to things, the movements like our indigenous rights and reconciliation, and of course, Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movements. Those movements are having a profound impact on how we experience, the collective we experience resilience. They're making our societies more resilient because they're teaching us to, frankly, for once, tune into each other's marginalization and pain. And the more we jumpstart that cycle, the better it's going to be that, frankly, when we have positive thoughts, it's not just going to be in our heads. We're going to actually have worlds that, frankly, reward us for the empathy that we're showing. That's the way I see it. A very strong connection between social justice and the empathy that we're going to experience and give back to others. Thanks for the question, Mary.
Thank you, Michael, for your thoughtful answer. A lot of reflection on that, and loved hearing about your casserole community where you live. Great to meet you as well. Well, over the next half hour, we are lucky to have world-renowned experts in their fields hosting Roots of Empathy cafes. We're running 3 breakout rooms. We invite you to those. It's a very special kind of cafe that we're running. I'm going to tell you more about that in a minute, but right now, on behalf of the entire Roots of Empathy team, I want to thank our speakers that we've heard so far, Dr. Richard Davidson, Jimmy Briggs, Jesse Lipscomb, Dr. Dan Siegel, and also Dr. Michael Unger, whom you just heard. Tomorrow, little peek ahead, we're going to be back with an eclectic lineup of speakers on the theme of empathy and well-being. Surprising research on the relationship between empathy and learning academic subjects like math, science, and English. Yeah, I mean, it seems that you can't have one without the other, which is quite a head turner for many people. Also, did you know that babies are altruistic? They are, but babies can also show bias, which can be the seeds of future racism and other kinds of intolerance. We're going to dive into that subject. We also have 3 of Canada's most powerful female leaders in a discussion about why empathy is good for business. And it doesn't cost you anything, even better. I'm excited also about our very first Roots of Empathy Award. Founder Mary Gordon is going to give the honor to former Justice and Senator Murray Sinclair for his lifelong commitment to social justice. So you don't want to miss day 2, and I look forward to seeing you, all over the world in 52 countries, back here at 1 o'clock tomorrow Eastern Time. Right now, though, make sure you head over to the cafes, join one of the 3, and we're going to have some stimulating conversation. Our cafe topics include, cafe number 1, the topic is, why do some kids struggle while others shine? You may know Dr. Michelle Borba. She is an internationally recognized educator, celebrated for her solution-based strategies on raising resilient kids. She's just written a new book. It's called Thrivers. Really interesting subject on why kids who seem to have it all, marks, privilege, loving parents, they're suffering from depression, they're lonely, they're sad. So she looks into this and has some suggestions on what you can do. Cafe number 2, the topic, what we don't see, the hidden dilemma of boys. The host is Emma Brown. She is a former teacher and now investigative journalist at the Washington Post. She's also written a book, did a lot of research into the problems that young boys and young men are facing today. And it's fascinating stuff. So please join Emma and myself. I'll be doing an interview with her. That's cafe number 2. Cafe number 3, we continue our discussion on Black fatherhood and raising kids in a post-pandemic world. Your hosts, Jimmy Briggs, Jesse Lipscomb, and also they are going to be joined by moderator Keita Deming. So a wonderful chance, if you heard the earlier discussion, to get in on it, send your own comments and questions. So at this time, I ask you to minimize the media player, all right? So don't be on full screen, minimize that screen, and you can visit rootsofempathy symposium.com as well. What happens is when you minimize the screen, you're going to see the 3 cafes. They're right under the media player. You just have to click on the cafe that you would like to join, all right? It's simple. Once again, if you're interested in learning more about Roots of Empathy or making a donation in support of our mission, please visit rootsofempathy.org. Thanks again to all our guests and, of course, to all of you for being with us today. See you at the cafes.
Okay. There we go. Our long-term goal is building a more caring, peaceful, and civil society where everybody feels a sense of belonging.
One little girl said, "You just can't help yourself but love her." But we're learning that she communicates how she's feeling, not with words as we do, but through her body, through her emotions, through her facial expressions, her tone of voice. She's vulnerable. She's more vulnerable than they are, and we have many vulnerable children in our classrooms. And so it elicits this care for her.
One thing I like learning about of roots of empathy is learning about a newborn human body.
If children just had the capacity to own their feelings, to understand them, to know how to talk about how they feel, they would not be islands. Our mental health would go up. Roots of Empathy is a bit of a trick. We use a baby as a vehicle to help children find the vulnerability and humanity in this little baby, so that then you can flip it back to their own experiences. If we are educating children who can read well and compute well, but can't relate well, we will have a failed society. Learning how to relate to one another requires empathy. You have to understand how the other fella feels.
Bye, baby Naomi, we'll see you soon.